Hello and welcome to the second day of the first Primal Green Assembly. I am very pleased to have everyone here today. We're starting the day with a speaker on diversity, Yolanda Rother. But first, I'd just like to touch on some of the points that we discussed yesterday, which will all be available on the website as video recordings, and all of the resources that we discussed will also be available. So yesterday we started off the talk with Simone Kellerhoff from Material Mafia, who is a well-known person in the sustainability scene. She provides resources such as materials from exhibitions or that are left over. She has a very large warehouse at Haus der Materialisierung at Alexanderplatz. I definitely encourage everyone to pay her a visit, especially if you're planning an exhibition or an event, or if you just need materials. It's also available online, the entire catalog, which is pretty fantastic, I have to say. And then we also spoke to Hannebeck Manigetta and Lena Fliesbach, who were part of the Zero Waste exhibition. Actually, they were the curators of the Zero Waste exhibition in Leipzig, and they continue to work in sustainability topics, working towards less waste inside curatorial practices. What's very interesting about their presentation is they also touched on themes like communication, travel, CO2 footprints, and calculating the CO2 footprint. I was very grateful to have some insights into where to even begin such a process. And finally, yesterday we spoke to Jan Erdweg von Grüne Stadtlogistik, and he also is building a network of bicycles or alternative logistics, alternative transportation within Berlin, starting from various hubs. And it's going to be a busy few years for Jan, I think, ahead, because we're just starting to touch on these different topics of transportation and traffic. But today, as you see, I have joining me Yolanda Rother. She's based in Berlin. She is the co-founder of the Impact Company, and she's also the Europe lead at Stiftung Zukunft Berlin. There, she's building digital tools for a better Europe, as her bio says. She's worked internationally to talk about topics of government, diversity, urban development, and decolonization. Um, what I find very interesting about Yolanda's work, and one of the reasons that I wanted to invite her, is because we both feel that diversity, inclusion, and speaking about these topics is absolutely essential to the topic of sustainability. Sustainability is not just a topic that has to do with recycling or waste. It also has to do with better integrating the people that are around us, or the people that we would hope to be working with. So without further ado, I welcome Yolanda. Today we're going to do the presentation a little bit differently. I'm actually just going to do a live interview with her. Of course, you can put your questions in the chat, and everything will be available on the website in the coming weeks. Great to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alicia, for inviting me and having me. It's really wonderful to hear about what it is that you're building, the mission that you're on, and yeah, it's great to be a part of this. And no worries about the connectivity issues. I've been experiencing them myself. Hopefully not today, but yeah,
We'll
let's just
forge
see
ahead.
where we end. Yeah.
Great. Well, the first thing I was hoping you could tell me is what you're doing with Stiftung Zukunft and what the Impact Company is.
Yeah. So they're two very separate things, and somehow they still converge at some point. So Stiftung Zukunft Berlin is a foundation that's been around for about 15 years here in the city of Berlin, and functions as a forum, a platform for civic engagement. So we deal with a lot of different topics that relate to the city of Berlin. but also Berlin and Brandenburg, and also Europe, from water consumption all the way to real estate, but also such things as graveyards, just to give an example of the breadth of topics that we deal with at the foundation. In my particular function there as a member of the board and Europe lead, I specifically deal with local regions, cities, civic organizations across Europe who really work to bring a broader and greater understanding of what Europe means, especially in these times.
Mhm.
So that's what I've been working on with them for the past 1.5 years. Interestingly enough, around the same time that I've been working with the foundation, I also decided to join forces with a co-founder, a longtime friend of mine, for building a diversity company, and it is called the Impact Company. We've been on the market for, it's soon going to be a year, and yeah, essentially, we are a diversity, culture, and audience consultancy. We support other organizations and businesses as they develop their strategies to become more inclusive and more diverse and more equitable. And it's been an exciting journey to be a founder, a co-founder, from the bureaucratic aspects all the way down to the fun part, which is actually working with different clients who are really understanding to make this more and more their mission. But yeah, that means I have a full week spread across both of those organizations. Yeah.
I can imagine, and I imagine that especially now as we're seeing a rise with sustainability topics when it comes to things like the environment and resources, that it's the same for diversity. People are becoming more aware. I mean, we're all seeing it every day, even down to things like the way our social media is tagged or described, which I'm very grateful for that things are moving in this direction. So how do you approach these topics, and what are some of the most common questions that you might receive when you're working first starting to work with an organization?
So, with the Impact Company, we work with organizations and companies. And what has been working is to really use the lingo of investment. And as twisted as it may sound, to like make a cause for how this will not only impact individuals who are employees or in leadership positions, but very much also it will impact their bottom line. So we're really saying that we saw trends such as digitalization a couple of years ago. Sustainability is, of course, still the main driver for decision making, or should be the main driver for decision making. But also, diversity is a large aspect that needs to be considered from a strategic point of view, and is not supposed to be a feel good situation, or we're doing something that's like just going to make other people feel good. No, we're actually saying that this has to be at the core of a business's strategy in order to, impact their bottom line, but also to then we continue the conversation to then really reflect representation
Mhm.
to support marginalized communities, and align that closely with a business's or an organization's mission.
Mhm. Just off the cuff, in response to that, how maybe it's also good to enter into this conversation with a definition. How would you define diversity? Like, what specifically are we talking about here?
Mm. Um, yeah, I mean, diversity actually isn't even the best word to use when we're talking about creating more equitable. measures. So there's this DEI is usually what we speak of, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those terms are even still shifting. So sometimes we even speak about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or and justice. So there's a few other acronyms that are being used. But when we speak about diversity, it means that there is a diverse set of factors in the realm of human resources. This would mean that there's diversity when it comes to gender, diversity when it comes to racial heritage, race and heritage, diversity of sexual orientation, and so on. So there's also an aspect of intersectionality that really lays at the foundation of the work that we do with the impact company. And that means that there's really this convergence of these different diversity factors. Uh, why diversity sometimes isn't enough as a word um, to describe the work that we're doing and the goal that we're having with it is that some organizations may be like, well, we have a diverse set of individuals, but if you look at it, it may be not enough individuals from underrepresented communities or different privileges and backgrounds, and therefore we like to bring in this concept of equity, belonging, and justice.
Okay, that's a really good starting point also for defining terminology. I can imagine that it also comes up when maybe for myself, sometimes when we're thinking about putting job offers on the table, we're never really sure how to define a job offer, which sort of brings me to another topic. Which is, I don't consider myself a shy person necessarily. I'm very open. But sometimes when it comes to topics that I feel are sensitive, where I might make a misstep when it comes to race, gender, class in the art world, I get very nervous, and I almost sometimes don't want to talk about them because I'm afraid of talking about them in the wrong way. And so I'm wondering if you have any tips as to, from your perspective, how we can facilitate open, honest, understanding exchanges on these topics.
Mhm. Yeah, first of all, thank you for sharing the sentiment, which I think that a lot of people can relate to. There's a lot of change happening when it comes to, first of all, the terms, the understanding, and it's, we also really do live in a cancel culture. Moment, which is frustrating because it's almost not allowing for vulnerable moments of or learning processes when really this is a moment to learn. So I think this point that you bring up is something that a lot of people can relate to. I think that there's a lot of strength that can be gained in understanding a couple things. Let's start with a first. We do live in a racialized society, and the system in and of itself is built in a way over many years, over many centuries, that what we can really differentiate between what's happening on an individual level, what's happening on an institutional level, and then what's happening on a historical and structural level. And I think understanding these different dimensions of discrimination, of racism specifically, really helps to understand what is my individual role and how is the system that I'm living in perhaps perpetuating certain power dynamics. Then the second thing that we all as individuals can do is to apply some self-reflection and just become aware of our very own privileges. And those privileges can be wide reaching. There's this wonderful, or not wonderful, but there's a very good image which is called the Wheel of Power. And this Wheel of Power shows how close certain factors are to power, where access to power is close and where access to power is further away. And engaging with that wheel of power really allows each and every one to reflect and see what, yeah, how our proximity to power essentially, and therefore allows for some form of self-reflection. At the same time, reflecting on one's own privilege doesn't mean that we need to feel ashamed about that if we end up being very close to that wheel of power, because nobody can be guilty or held accountable for how they were born. But it is just to understand that there are other individuals who are further removed from this power, and therefore understanding how perhaps this, as Peggy McIntosh, somebody who's really coined this movement or this academic school on privilege and also on unconscious bias, says once we recognize what we're actually carrying and what we've been granted and given, then we can also perhaps take a step back and see how we can give the opportunity, give that access, extend our own privilege to those who maybe don't have that. I also brought in the term of unconscious bias, which is another thing to be aware of. We all have unconscious biases, and becoming more aware of them will help us to recognize them. It's not something that we'll ever get rid of entirely, but it's something that will help us understand where perhaps we are giving opportunities to those who are more similar to us. If that's because they went to the same school, or because they're in the same industry, or because of whatever that is. And so I think once we become more self reflective and decide to really actively, yeah, understand the system and choose to have an active role in it, I think that there's a lot that can be achieved with that.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I'm definitely going to find the wheel of power and add it to our resources page. But I've also found in my own projects, when we've had greater a, a greater range of people on my teams, some of the ideas that they come up with, whether it's somebody older or younger, or of a of a different race or whatever, we the ideas are just things that we never would have thought of.
Mm,
But with this in mind, I touched on the beginning of the on the diversity that I've seen in some exhibitions. Yesterday, I mentioned that this year for the art world is a huge year. There's all of the major exhibitions, and when I look at the artists that are participating, it's wonderfully diverse. It's fantastic, and I'm thrilled to see all of these different groups and nations and orientations and ages on the walls. But I'm wondering what you're seeing behind the scenes. If you're seeing that same kind of diversity, and if you have specific tips about how we can improve and design work conditions of employment to achieve these goals.
mm. Yeah, I've also been seeing quite a few interesting developments, specifically to the art world. And of course, the questions that come up are very much informed by the work that I do. So the questions that I have are there measurements? Is there data being collected around this? And is this just a trend, or is this something that will structurally have a sustainable impact and a lasting effect? And so these are things that I'm sure if we dig a little bit deeper and look into some of these institutions, papers and researches, perhaps we could identify, some of their measures behind that and see that this is hopefully more than just a one-time type of thing. Um, yeah, and that's my one hope. Specifically, I think your question was also pertaining somewhat to Berlin and what's happening. Yeah, how are things developing here, and and how we can really make this change. yeah, for a greater good. And I think perhaps there could be more collaboration between art groups, art institutions in Berlin, and organizations such as perhaps the one that I'm a part of, and other organizations to make or even bring out a white paper or make a call for more diversity. I think through joint synergies, we could probably just go a lot further. That's something that I think also has the potential of Berlin and the art world here, but it requires just exactly formats and forms that you are creating right now.
Yeah, I mean that's this these you bring up 2 points that were a thread through all of the discussions I had yesterday. One is to reflect and to examine what's happening within your organization, and the other is to not be afraid to reach out to create networks. It might be a little bit more effort, a few more emails, a little bit more understanding and time on the part of both parties because we're all sort of new to this. But it seems like that's what everybody's recommending. Um, on with this in mind, I know that you're a native German and English speaker, and so there was one conversation that I had before within the framework of the Berlin Art Prize, and a speaker, Mohammed Salemi, he suggested that learning German was a huge block to achieving greater inclusivity within especially Berlin cultural organizations. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, this probably ties in somewhat to the work that I do with the foundation and the work that I do there in the Europe department. And we were actually just having this conversation around how one of the things that the European Union, we don't only look at the European Union, we really look at Europe as a whole, but still, one of the things that the European Union hasn't really achieved is to create more language opportunities so that we can yeah, exchange, have more of a language understanding. And so that's looking at it from that perspective. Now, what I think you said Mohammed Salimi says
Mhm.
about speaking
It was
German as a barrier. Hmm?
what he was saying is that the German institutions had to open up to non-German speakers, to English speakers, because he didn't feel that it was possible to achieve um, diversity if there was this requirement. Because as we all know, or as any native English speaker knows, it takes a very long time to learn German.
Yeah. And as unfortunate as it is, I do agree to it. But I have to say, to an extent, I feel like I was just traveling to another European country. It happened to be Spain, and I came. My impression was that actually in Germany, specifically in Berlin, there is more of a knowledge and command of the English language than there was in this particular context when I was traveling in Spain. And so it's difficult to compare at this point, like the different circumstances. And yeah, I totally understand that this is a barrier. And I hope that there's more that there's more openness for different languages because this is also one of the pulls of the city of Berlin to bring more international talent um, and international artists here. And so if there's like not only a language barrier but somehow like a cultural barrier and a resistance towards English or any other language besides German, that's almost like a microaggression. It's almost like a continuous rejection of oneself and a continuous state of questioning oneself as an artist and as yeah, just as a human in a way, because it's like um, I have this art practice, and why is even German being required, and why is that, like, is this being a barrier? So I definitely understand the extreme frustration around that. I unfortunately don't have the answers to this, but definitely do think that it is somewhat of a barrier in order to achieve inclusivity, in order um, to move along more forward, and it's being frowned upon in parts in certain places, I guess, and being reflective of one's credentials and actual capabilities, which is not right. I do think that with this shift of institutions becoming more open to inclusivity and diversity and more equitable means, that this is also something that is changing and being shaped along the way. But yeah, there's still a long way to go.
Right, right. I only have you for 25 minutes, and it's just flown by. So I guess if there's any questions, the participants can feel free to add them in the chat. But I will also just wrap up with a final question, which is um, what do you recommend moving forward as far as inviting major institutions to be even more embracing of a diverse and different future.
Hmm. Do you want me to express this recommendation towards the major institutions?
I think so, or I mean, or the smaller, or the smaller groups like myself. Or if it's easier, you can also just maybe. I know that the participants are very welcoming to recommendations of websites or funding organizations, or yeah.
Hmm. So, I mean, there's a lot of, I've been in touch with quite a few very interesting initiatives. For instance, there's I'm blanking on the name, but in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, there's actually um, an an art form of resistance towards museums and the funding that they receive.
Mhm.
And I'm glad to share this resource with you
Yeah.
afterwards, so you could share that. But there's potential for organizing stronger within on a very local level, but also on a more European level. As we already brought as one of the topics, there's potential to build synergies with different organizations across industries. So, for instance, a diversity consultancy such as the Impact Company, do feel free to reach out if we can support you with your diversity and inclusivity efforts. And the message that I would send to large institutions is that we can't continue like this. And I feel like institutions who are mostly, yeah, entrenched, all white, all westernized, and this is also happening in the decision making process. I think that there needs to be just like a very strong look into the mirror and recognition of what the 21st century and what historically has happened, and what the future, what they can do in their role as a responsibility also, and bring about change. I think that's there's a need to perhaps step down in some positions, um, but these are for like the large major institutions.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, that's I think that that's great, and again, I appreciate that you touch on this idea of also networking and exchange. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I definitely recommend everybody check out the work that you're doing, and I appreciate the time that you've given today, and you'll be hearing from me soon.
Thank you so much, Alicia. All the best to all of you, and I'll stick around for a bit.
Nice.
Thanks.
Okay, ciao.